So folks, this is a conversation with one of the legendary Indians. As I said a little bit earlier, one of the best exports India's had since a long, long time is Indians. And Vinod is a very clear example of that. Studied in one of our leading engineering schools, and then wanted to set up a venture for soy milk, I believe, and only left India because he couldn't get that venture off the ground. There was no cold chain available. And poor guy had no choice but to go to all these fancy schools out here. And then came down and settled in. And I think he's always had a restless nature. He's continuously pushed the boundaries on what's going on at that point in time, and which got demonstrated in the different assignments he had, in the different enterprises he's set up. But he's had an amazing focus on things that will help humanity. Focus on things like energy, making things easier, which will make life easier for people. So we know this is both, it's been an amazing entrepreneurial journey and also a journey of helping mankind in many ways. So they say you're not the easiest person to get along with because you are both demanding and can be tough to work with. And sometimes it's hard for people to reconcile these two, that here's a guy who's doing nice stuff, but he's not a nice guy. He's just pushing me. So what happens? Do you get impatient when you deal with people, or is it just the way you like to do things, or are you impatient all the time?
Well, I am impatient. Mm-hmm. I do demand a lot. I tell a funny story. When my son took his SAT exam a while ago, and he was at the 97th percentile, he didn't tell me for 2 weeks. It was in one of the 3 scores. He didn't tell me for 2 weeks because he knew I'd say that's not acceptable. I am demanding. I do consider it my job to work. I only work with really great people. And really great people have much more potential than they think they have. So I consider my job pushing people to be as great as they can be, to essentially let them do their thing, but push them to excellence. And that's very much my approach to life, my approach with great entrepreneurs. How great can you be? Why can't you do better? I like to say, good isn't good enough, great is barely acceptable. That's sort of my most common line with people. So I don't settle ever. I don't settle for myself. I'm 62. I easily work 80 hours a week. That'd probably be an underestimate. I still read raw scientific papers. I probably read 100 of them last month, because August is my catch-up month. I'll read computer architectures, I'll read physics discoveries, I'll read about AI algorithms, about biology. I cover every area. I'm constantly educating myself, pushing myself, and I like to push people who have potential to do more.
Well, George Bernard Shaw always said, the reasonable man adapts himself to the world. And the unreasonable one persists in trying to adapt the world to himself. So all change that has really taken place has been due to unreasonable people, always. And
in fact, it's one of my favorite quotes. I'm doing a piece that I'll publish probably in the next month on technology, societal reinvention using technology. Mm-hmm. It's a piece that we can come back and talk to. But it's about how you reinvent society. And in fact, that George Bernard Shaw quote is in there, along with a Martin Luther King quote. And Martin Luther King said, human progress depends on the socially maladjusted. Because it's so easy to fit in and want to fit in that you don't sort of push the end. I'll give you a simple example. I was last night going through this conference instructions, and they said, ties preferred. And I said, if you want me to talk about innovation, the worst thing you could do is ask people to wear ties. It's an archaic invention. Look, this is for the conference organizers, not for you. Like I said, I like fireworks. But ties, and I hate it when doctors wear ties because the single largest source of germs that doctors transmit to their patients is ties. It's been well established in research. Why are we doing this? Why hasn't somebody asked the question why? Now, I stopped wearing a tie in the 80s, and people couldn't answer why I should wear it. I was told a number of times to wear it, and I asked why, and nobody ever had an answer. And so the hardest was the first time I went to the White House, I didn't wear a tie, because I had to have the courage of my convictions to say, if I don't believe in it, look, if it's a wedding, that's a different thing. There you're paying respect to somebody, and I say, if the bride and groom want you to wear a tie, I'll wear a tie. Not that I have in any recent time, but I would.
So you're actually right. At the World Economic Forum, at one point in time, they used to penalize you. I forget now, it was $5 or $10 if you actually were seen wearing a tie anytime in Davos at that time. Of course, that culture seems to have changed some time ago. And I should tell you, this is the second time I've worn a tie myself in 3 months. I thought I need to look formal here with all these fancy places. But I want to pick up on something you said a little while earlier. You talk about creating a new world through technology. Now, this is a subject which is a hot subject right now, that there's a wall of technology coming at us. In all aspects of our lives, we find things might work better, quicker, cheaper, faster. But at the same time, we're also saying you'll have driverless cars. If I give you the number of drivers, and I'm talking now about India, who lose their jobs, it's a staggering number. Chatbots for services, robotics for manufacturing. So all of these are going to make our lives much more efficient and much easier. But we've been talking about the need to generate 1 million new jobs month on month, every month for the next 15 or 20 years. Now it does not include the jobs that will get lost with technology. How can technology help us do both things together, which is
okay. So
easier
I do think
yeah.
This is the classic kind of question we have to ask, why do we want jobs? We don't really want jobs. Do you want 100 million people working on assembly lines, sorting eggs, sorting apples, inspecting machine parts? I don't want that job. Why we want jobs is for 2 reasons. One, people need to have a source of income.
Yep.
But if they can have income without jobs, they'd much rather have that. Okay?
Yep.
And so you say, what do we want? We want GDP growth, and we want income distribution, income equality. Those are the fundamental requirements, not jobs. And this is why you ask fundamental questions. And I wrote a piece, there's a piece in Forbes I wrote in 2014 about AI and how it would eliminate more than 50% of all jobs that exist in a country like the US within the next 30 to 50 years. And that'll be a good thing, but it'll create one large problem. We will have GDP growth, we'll have productivity growth, all the things economists like, which is sort of obsolete. I mean, economics looks back, and so economics is sort of an obsolete thing. In fact, next week I'm speaking on the economic implications of AI at the National Bureau of Economic Research conference. We will have all that, and we will have income disparity. So the problem isn't jobs. The problem is, if we have great abundance, we will have greater income disparity. And so it becomes a redistribution problem that I think is much easier to solve than the problem of jobs, creating more jobs.
Our social culture.
I know it's a radical view, and I'm talking very long term, and 10 years from now, we need 20 million more jobs in India.
So the social cultural milieu that we live in requires that you're productively occupied. So it's not just about income distribution. You're going to have to train societies to think and operate and behave differently.
Yes.
So it's a much bigger task than just incomes, by the way.
Right.
I have to say income is not enough. It is, of course, important, but
by the way,
it's
I
not-
talked
yeah.
about this in 2014 piece,
Yeah.
that the largest issue will be the search for meaning for human beings.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I anticipated this was 3.5, 4 years ago.
So I want to take you off a little bit, again, going back a little bit in your history. I believe at one point in time you were offered or you were negotiating to be a dominant owner of Google, and it kind of didn't come to
No.
pass for some negotiation or some such.
No.
Yeah.
It's
Is that a myth?
It's not a myth. Here's the real story.
Yep.
I was on the board of a company that was doing search. The company is called Excite. And this episode is accurately captured in the book Search that was written by somebody around Berkeley, I think. And I negotiated with Larry and Sergey when they were still graduate students to buy Google for a few $100,000, and they agreed, but Excite didn't want to acquire them. Which was very good for us because at Kleiner Perkins, we got to invest in Google, and we were one of the original investors. So all that worked out great. And if they'd acquired it, it wouldn't have been what it is today.
They say you're also an adventurer, personally. You like adventure. So what drives you?
Look, for whatever reason, I like exploring the edges. Most systems, and I love sort of spending time in unusual places. So when I took a sabbatical, it's been 15 years since I took a sabbatical, I became a postdoc at the Santa Fe Institute in Complex Systems Theory. My kids loved it because I had a math PhD from Stanford come tutor me for 6 months so I could be up to speed on my math. And what I learned is, first, systems are really complex, and complex systems theory is really coming into its own. But one of the critical things is change happens at the edges. And it doesn't matter if you're talking about economies, cities, biological systems. Change happens at the edge. And I like to explore those edges. I like to know what I don't know. And that's a really important characteristic. It's one of the reasons, and this is one of my sort of beefs with institutional organizations. And by institutions, I mean everything from the World Bank and the UN to the US government to the Indian government to ministers to large organizations like Cisco and IBM and GE and Siemens. I haven't seen anything new come out of any large organization in the last 25 years. Not one important thing. I'm writing a separate piece. August is my writing month, so I write a lot in August. I read a lot and I write a lot. I always take the month of August off to research and write. No large innovation. The best innovation I could come up is the credit card in the 70s, where Bank of America went from debit and credit cards to credit on plastic. That was the largest innovation out of an existing institution. There had been plenty of incremental institutions, but no reinvention. So when we wear ties, and this might be, we subscribe, there's not a problem with ties. It's a problem with subscribing to culture and tradition. In my family, I'm very traditional, right? But in society, you have to look at the edges. You have to look at new. You have to say what encourages new behavior. right? And that's what's interesting. It doesn't come out of Cisco or any large organization. To be honest, if somebody's worked at a big company for 15 years, I think they're unqualified to do anything useful in innovation. Okay?
So I'll tell you,
I'll probably offend a few people.
So at this point in time, that's why we called you, by the way. So at this point in time,
You wanted fireworks.
so India's trying a number of what it considers new initiatives on digital identities, payment systems, new practices in agriculture, digitizing revenue records, land ownership, et cetera, et cetera. And there's a whole host of other initiatives which have been launched in recent times. Is there any recommendation or suggestions that you would have which could help us dramatically move these initiatives forwards? And I'll take some specific examples. If you see here, we have Dr. Lal, who runs India's largest diagnostics lab. Yeah. Now, technology is coming in which will change his stuff. Mohan is one of our most prolific investors in new ideas. So what do you think are the 2 or 3 key initiatives that are necessary for us to take right now?
So let me give you my views, and my views are very naive because I don't live in India and don't pretend to understand the details.
No, but sometimes an outsider's view, because we're so involved in everyday stuff.
Yeah.
That for
so
us,
let me suggest the following. Let me tell you a little bit of history. Before 1995, if you looked at what the Indian government was doing, well, forget the original liberalization, which was early 90s. 1995, we said, what's interesting? The Indian government had all these export initiatives, but it was textiles. And then software came along. And I remember being at some conference with when Yashwant Singh was finance minister in the late 90s, and he was talking about software. Now, the Indian government, what they did with software was not pay attention to it. And that was the best thing they could.
Why it worked.
That's why it worked. Yeah. So in the late 90s, I talked about the fact that outsourcing was orders of magnitude bigger than software. But they were paying attention to outsourcing, software.
One interruption I want to because that was around the same time. You and I had a conversation on something you had called the bicycle economy.
Yes.
Do you remember that?
Yes, I do. There's a paper I wrote in 2000 that's still on my website, The Bicycle Commute Economy.
Yeah. So can you just expand a little bit? It'll be
Let me come back to that. Let me finish this thought. I'll come back to that. That paper is
part of the same,
still on. It was an economic thesis of how India should develop. I still believe that thesis today, 15, 17 years later. And I do a lot of these thought pieces, and they're mostly for myself. They're not written for others. So they're never polished. But I think that way by writing things down. But my point was, India was paying attention to software, so outsourcing took it off. Forever, they paid attention to the number of landlines, and cellular took off. And while they were paying attention to cellular, now Reliance has introduced Geo, and data is taking off. So government having initiatives is a really, really bad idea. Okay? When the ambassador says the prime minister or this minister did that, I cringe. Okay, but there's a very important role for government. Infrastructure is so critical for government, and the most important piece of infrastructure that's affordable has been instituted in India over any other country, and that's Aadhaar. Like, no entity could have done that, and to me, it's infrastructure on which digital services can be built. It's a massive opportunity. The next thing we can do is deregulate and free up things. GST is a great thing. But that infrastructure of Aadhaar would take away the 2 biggest risks, which is risk and trust characterization are fundamental to economic life. And everything we do is a tax because we don't trust or we don't risk. Why do we have Havela? Because we can't escrow things electronically or we can't trust. So where should that escrow be? It shouldn't be in Havela. It shouldn't be in a bank. It should be in the blockchain. If the blockchain was the escrow mechanism, if software contracts were implemented on the blockchain, you'd get rid of 80% of the need for business disputes, right? You'd have trust, you'd have money flowing freely. In India, and this is why I love Aadhaar, blockchain has some problems, but blockchain from Aadhaar, which takes away anonymity, you have full traceability. So if India could combine those two, say Aadhaar plus blockchain plus software contracts, that's the digital infrastructure. You can build any application type. That's massive infrastructure. Right? Banking, there's no reason you can't have 100 people run a bank that provides banking services for 1 billion people. It should be electronic. It shouldn't need people. There should be no customer service. Everything should be electronic. But government shouldn't do that. They should enable that to happen on this Aadhaar blockchain-like infrastructure. My point is the following, and this is what I really get excited. I feel like a little kid. There's so much opportunity. You know, the last 20, 30 years of those of us in Silicon Valley has been about technology affecting technology businesses. Yes, we can start Sun Microsystems, we can start VMware, we can start computer companies. What is exciting to me is I see the next 20 years about technology affecting every other business in ways that people can't imagine. So I'll give you a couple of examples, and this one thought piece is that I've written. It's only 10,000 words so far. It'll keep expanding. But I wrote this in August, so I'm excited about it. Take healthcare, okay? Every person in India can get a personal physician for free forever because AI systems make much better doctors than any human being can. It's silly to consult a human being for medicine. What the diagnosis, the prescription, the monitoring, that should all be done via the AI. We have a company, Israeli company, offering in India all radiology for $1. Any radiology read you want to do, it's $1. Pathology should be the same way. You shouldn't need humans. You know, today you get an MRI, you wait 3 days for a radiologist to look for it. And if you need surgery on your knee because you tore your ACL skiing, you're waiting for a week. You should get the diagnosis instantaneously. We have a company doing ultrasound the same way. But not only that, they eliminate the need for an ultrasound technician because they have AI tell you on a phone which way to move the probe. Right? So all of medicine should be this way. All of medicine. And we should get humans out of the loop of medicine. For those of you interested, last year I wrote a 110-page thesis on the reinvention of medicine using technology. It's on our website if you Google 20% doctor included. What you need the doctor for is to comfort people. The human element of care, not to do real stuff. And the dean of the Harvard Medical School was shocked because 3 years ago I said, you ought to change your admissions criteria. You have to be so high IQ to get into Harvard Medical School or Stanford. You have no EQ. I said, change your criteria. If you're designing doctors for 10, 15 years from now, change your criteria to look exactly like the USC Film School admissions criteria. Because that emotional care, that mirror neurons, your ability to put yourself into the other person's shoes, that's what you need out of the human element. Right? So rethinking everything by asking fundamental questions. So that's just healthcare. Yeah. Let me talk about agriculture. We sold a company, it was just announced, I think, Friday. no, 2 days ago. We sold a company to John Deere, a tractor equipment, farm equipment company. It uses AI to drive through fields at 4 miles per hour and pick out weeds. Right? Kills weeds using AI. Now, think of the implications. Why I invested? To eliminate all chemicals from agriculture. By the way, agriculture costs in the US for large-scale farming, corn, wheat, soy, 40% of a farmer's cost is chemicals. If you can eliminate that cost and make society so much better because you have no herbicides or insecticides, that's exciting. Who would have said there's an opportunity in agriculture? We have a company here that's redesigning the hamburger to take 80% less land to produce a hamburger. Hamburgers take something like 3,000 liters of water to produce 1 kilogram of hamburger meat on your table. 3,000 liters. It's ridiculous. We can reduce that by 95%. So if we can redesign hamburgers with technology, eliminate herbicides from farming, eliminate and scale medicine to be so much better because we have technology, almost any area you point out to me, and this is what my upcoming paper is about, I think buildings should be 3D printed, not built the way we do. If you do intelligent design, there's a field of mechanical engineering called generative design that's just showing up. If you Google generative design, it's very cool. You could use 1/5 to 1/10 the materials. If you could build this building with 1/5 to 1/10 the weight, its cost is going to be lower. Right? You'll need less cement. You'll need less steel. So that's building and construction. Take driverless cars. You mentioned that. You know, today the average car in the US, and it's true in India too, is driven about 12,000 miles a year in the US. If you have driverless cars that are driven 120,000 miles a year, which is very easy, even 200,000, you need 1/10 the number of cars. We don't need the auto industry. You need parts that aren't designed to be crash-proof because they won't crash. That should be public transportation. I'm certain 25 years from now, the leading cities will be offering point-to-point public transportation in the US at $1 anywhere to anywhere. And they'll make money, not lose money like every public transit service today. Why? Because you need 1/10 the number of cars, 1/10 the number of resources, it's on demand. Buses, by the way, public transportation has a horrible climate footprint. Why? Because every bus is designed to run at peak times, which is for 2 or 3 hours a day. Rest of the time, it's running empty. It's low schedule frequency. It's low occupancy. I hate to see the New York subway with one person in a 100,000-pound car. You're taking 100,000 pounds of steel to move one 200-pound person. All of this needs to be rethought. It's being enabled by technology, and that's the opportunity. And frankly, in a country like India, you have an opportunity to do this like we did with cell phones. Yeah. Leapfrog, don't copy. Leapfrog the world like we did with cell phones. So I get very excited about the technology opportunities to reinvent healthcare, transportation, housing, cities, agriculture, food. Everything can be reinvented. People get surprised when I say there is no area not open to technology-based radical reinvention.
So I'm going to give people a chance to ask
questions.
questions.
Sorry, I talked too much.
No, that's okay. So, Mohan, so, do you have any mics here? Can we get a mic here, please?
The big issue for human beings is your life. How do you extend human beings' lifespan with good health? I think that's the ultimate target for human beings. For example, we want you to live for 200 years because you're such a great visionary, a revolutionary. How do you make it happen?
Well, I think it'll happen because people are working on it for the first time. I'm not sure it's a good thing. Look, renovation and rejuvenation in society happens because you have new genes coming into the pool. You can't have evolution without if people live forever. And it's a good thing that we have change and turnover. It's sad, but it's also. Now, the first thing we should focus on, I think we will, is extending more. If you're going to live 100 years, more of it should be healthy, where you can exercise, you're not in a wheelchair, you're not sick, you're not a diabetic, you're not with cardiac disease. Extending what is the health span as opposed to, so more if your lifespan should be your health span is the important short-term goal. Now, if you want to read the other stuff, one of the books I read in August was a book called Homo Deus, which actually thinks humans' next step is to become God. You should read the book. It's between technologies like CRISPR, which I've gotten pretty familiar with, and to reinvent biology and information technology, you will do this. Now, interestingly, you have two companies that are doing drug discovery just using AI. No wet labs. No, okay? And we have a new company that's doing a fairly technical area of drug discovery, like most drugs are chemicals. There's something called antisense oligos, which we haven't yet learned how to take one gene out of the 30,000 and turn it on or off. Antisense oligos do that. I won't get too technical. Using AI, you can design new oligos that can do that. So those kinds of things are really exciting, and they, you know, if we know what causes aging, which genes turn on and off, or get more or less in gene technology upregulated or downregulated, we can do something about it and increase our healthy lifestyle. Sorry.
Can you get a mic here, please?
Thank you. Kind of a simplistic question, but with the elimination of humans in so many jobs, what's the answer to the tens of millions of young Indians who need jobs?
So, two things. One, I like to say I never predict anything, I just speculate. There's a big difference between predicting where you pretend you know and speculating where you say there's a range of possibilities, here's one possible scenario. In large changes, you can never predict the future, okay? So if I were a young Indian today, what would I do to answer your question? Have an education that's as flexible as possible. So, you know, recently an Indian won the spelling bee, okay? And there was lots of Indians proud and tweeting about it. And I tweeted, I think it's sad that Indians are winning the spelling bee because it reflects parenting focused on one thing, getting really good at spelling. And they haven't asked the question, what else? I hate to blow the bubble. Just yesterday, I rejected a proposal to finance a movie on Indians winning the spelling bee for this reason. I actually think it's a bad thing because we are drilling them into doing very narrow things really well as opposed to broadly learning to learn new things. There is a trade-off. So every time you have your kids spend 3 hours a day for 3 years practicing spelling, there's something else they're not doing. They're not reading broadly. They're not learning new things. They're not saying, hey, there's this new thing about planet Jupiter. Let me do this. Right? There was this recent article that on certain planets, it rains diamonds because of pressures and carbon content and methane content. Now, it's worth exploring because you learn a lot about how diamonds are formed, what happens on planet Earth. There's so much you can learn by exploring new threads that don't have predefined paths. So I sent my kids to a school which didn't have a single test through 9th grade. Not one. No tests, no grades, never. Why? Because I wanted them to learn to explore. And to Indians especially, they all spend their kids, Indians and Chinese, to Haas School here. Why? Because they scored the highest on SATs, they scored the highest on 10s, but they don't learn how to explore. And so, if I were a young Indian, to go back to your question, I'd learn how to learn and how to change areas. You know, I got a tutor, a math tutor, to teach me advanced mathematics when I wanted to go to Santa Fe Institute. That's okay. My wife went back to school to get a master's in education in her 50s. Now, it's hard to do assignments till 3 a.m., which is what she was doing. Right? You got a homework assignment, graduate students work late. Right? It's the culture, and that's what I would do different. The world is far less predictable than we think. The world will change way more. The technologies I talked about will change all our assumptions, right? We want people who can drive that change and be flexible enough to adapt. That's what I would teach my kids.
So Vinod, we have 5 minutes more. Can I gather a couple of questions together, and then you can go at it?
So,
Yes,
Vinod,
please.
my question was, you said lack of innovation from large corporations in the last 25 years. Do you see that as a flaw in the capital model or the capitalism model on deployment of resources, or what's your view on that?
I didn't quite get your question.
So the lack of innovation, so from large corporations that are sitting on large pools of capital,
Get a mic up there as well.
is that a,
Okay.
a structural flaw?
Okay.
Let's get
Just
a couple of questions and
second
I'll try
question
and
up there.
answer.
Why don't you just shout from there? Go ahead.
So,
And we'll take one more. We'll take the last one here.
And Vinod, you mentioned the White House. When was the first time you went? What was the advice you gave? When's the most recent time you went? And what advice are you giving?
well, let me generalize. Big corporations they're good for scaling things, okay? Now, they are so conservative, they will never innovate. So society should rely on experimentation in very small experiments to cause innovation. I like to say most people think improbable is unimportant. I say improbable is not unimportant, we just don't know which improbable is important, because all large change, whether it was Facebook or Twitter or Google or cell phones or iPhone, were all improbable, right? We just need to tolerate that risk. So I'd architect a society to tolerate more risk and encourage more experimentation at the edges and provide safety nets. One of the big problems in India, people are embarrassed to fail. I like to say, and there's a Harvard Business School that actually used this quote for me, my willingness to fail gives me the ability to succeed. So that's the culture that does. And that ties into this question about how I spend my day. My days are packed. I had probably 15 meetings yesterday. I don't even have time to have people leave a conference room for my next meeting is set up in a different room so I can not lose the 5 minutes. I go through a lot of material. I do a lot of meetings. I listen to a lot of people. I'm always trying to learn. Half my meetings are with people I like to learn. So unfortunately, when I get ministers and others requesting meetings, I just say no. But if a great technologist wants to come tell me about what they're doing, I'm willing to listen. And then I read an incredible amount. I easily go through, at least scan a couple of 100 pages a week. Obviously, I do most evenings till 11, I'm doing email because my days are so crammed. But generally, I'm scanning a lot of things, then I'm collecting things I don't have time to read. And then a month like August, I'll go through everything I didn't have time to read that was important to learn. So it's mostly focused on learning. I know we are out of time, so I apologize.
Yeah. So with Vinod, you always know you can expect the unexpected. So I'm sorry, we're going to wind up now. We run out of time. So if Vinod is still around, you have time, you can have a conversation because a few more hands were raised. So I'm afraid we are out of time. So sorry. Vinod, thank you very much for coming and for that outstanding conversation. Thank you.